Hello, good creatures, and welcome. I'm Petrina Calder, and I'm here with my friend Nate.
Hello, this is Nate Bolding, and today on the Creatures We Become podcast, we're going to be discussing Do Hard Things by Steve Magness. And so, what if everything we thought and we knew about toughness was wrong? What if being hard, the grit, the grind, the no days off bravado wasn't strength at all, but actually a fear of the real difficulty?
In Do Hard Things, Steve Magness takes a wrecking ball to the myths of toughness that shape our culture and many of us. He invites us into a new kind of resilience, not about pushing past pain, but learning to listen to it. Not about silence, but about self-awareness, and not about brute force, but about adaptive courage.
As a coach, I've pushed hard and I've been the hammer. I've pushed past what I was mentally capable and blocked out the feelings that I was experiencing in it. But this book made me ask, what happens when we learn to be the scalpel instead, precise and intentional?
And as a therapist, I see it every day. People carrying pain because they were told that vulnerability is weakness. But maybe real toughness begins when we stop performing it and start living it.
And today, on The Creatures We Become, we're diving into a book that challenges the old narrative of strength and mental toughness and replaces it with something that's far more human. So let's talk about what it really means.
To do hard things. I'm wondering, Nate, so I discovered this book when you shared it with me at a time where I was really struggling with doing hard things. I'm wondering, how did this book end up on your radar? How did you come to discover it in the first place?
Yeah, so Do Hard Things was an interesting one in kind of a quest of learning the specifics of some of the things that require people to do hard things. And so it kind of started with a couple books. There was this Endure one, and then Man's Search for Meaning came up in it, and you shared Man's Search for Meaning for me. But then a lot of the context and some of the things I view in the extremes from Holocaust-related stuff in literature that I've read, the Man's Search for Meaning really hit. And then it was kind of this perfect transition where you mentioned some struggle with the programming and the training you were doing, and that branched perfectly into this book that came up sort of on that theme of doing hard things. And then when I just dove into it, I was like, oh, this is exactly what Petrina needs at this time. And I thought it would just hit so well with you because of what I would say is your intelligence and your intellectual background, with this being a theme of kind of questioning the narrative of toughness. And then that's how it ended up me passing it on to you. And then we got into our first episode here.
Cool. And it was a perfect fit for me at the time. And yet it feels like I'm 6 months away from that now. So had lots of chance to apply a lot of what I have learned from that book in my life. So let's get into it.
Okay. Yeah, and it made really big impacts on me. I think it was interesting. It questioned some of the narratives that were continuous in me over time, but on narratives that I had already begun to question through some of the things in my chapters of life. And so one of the things Steve Magness said that hit me that I liked was, real toughness is experiencing discomfort or distress, leaning in, paying attention, and creating space to take thoughtful action. Now, for you, what's the difference between appearing tough and actually being resilient? And where have you personally confused the two?
Really good question. I think resilience for me has always been about that kind of ability to kind of get knocked down and get back up again. And life is full of literal and metaphorical moments of getting knocked down and having to get back up. And so it's kind of like being able to experience a stressor of some kind, and like, how do you respond in the face of that stressor in a way that's adaptive and helpful? And I think for me, toughness has sometimes been conflated with resiliency for me, that part of what it meant to be resilience was to be tough. But the way I was thinking about toughness, and I think many people do, in that metric, is it's more about less about resiliency and more about like your ability to not get knocked down in the first place, as though like being able to dig in your heels and persist in the face of like whatever the stressor is, even when maybe that's not the most adaptive response. Like I think that's the problem with defining toughness in that way. And so as an example for myself, where is the time where I have conflated those two things? I think that sometimes, like, as I have struggled with the programming at certain times where things have kind of jumped in intensity, especially like early on when things jumped up in intensity for me. Part of where I thought I needed to be really tough was about being really hard on myself and being rigid about things. Like if the program said I had to do this, then I had to do exactly that. And if I deviated from it, then I was failing. And I think part of it was about like being convinced that like holding myself accountable, being dependable, doing the things that I said I was going to do. I was just so determined to have things be different for myself this time than they had been in the past, where I had started and stopped on a fitness journey many times before. I was like, this time is going to be different. And the thing that needs to be different is that I can never not show up. I have to keep doing it. But there was a rigidity about what that looked like in my mind, that being tough meant that I would break myself against the program rather than not doing the program. Or whereas I think resiliency is more about, now I understand that sometimes the program can adapt to me based on what I'm needing in that moment. That consistency over time doesn't mean 100% perfect compliance over time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that was big for me watching you with programming. I think some of the things that I set up to figure out exactly what your thresholds were, you took that as like a test in the validation of what you were good enough or not. And like if you couldn't hit that metric, I remember very specifically the audio note you sent me and sounding so defeated that you were struggling with this thing. And I remember coming back and I was like, whoa, man, sometimes it's just about coming in and doing something hard, but the hard doesn't mean that it was 100% of what you were capable all the time. It was 100% of what you could do on that given day, and that adhering was consistently doing it on your 100% capacity of the day, but not 100% of your objective data on what was physically capable, which I thought it's funny that I think I can just think back exactly to the example you gave there. I think for me, it's interesting because what this makes me think of is a couple different times of being per se, not necessarily appearing just tough, but over resilience is some of these dichotomies of different stuff I've done, where say like bodybuilding, like where you think of a prep, it's basically trying to maintain as much muscle mass as possible and reduce fat mass. And so you're essentially creating starvation without suffering the full consequences of it, where you're feeding enough to keep protein around, but the other side of that is you're starving, but you're training hard enough to keep muscle around, and you're doing enough work to subject the body to starvation levels of fat mass and what it takes to say get under what would be say 5% body fat and around there. And that it's like this outwardly tough thing. Like it's like you're doing a lot of dieting and you're doing a lot of cardiovascular training, a lot of working volume, where you're going into say what would be 6,000-ish rough estimates of caloric holes per day, and like losing up to 2 pounds of fat mass and mass per day, but then keeping muscle mass around. But it's like this open, really hard thing. And it was hard, but then it's a lot of times what you have to do is for me early on, I would say in one of the errors of some of my bodybuilding was say looking at it like the extremes of what I had to do and go through not thinking about the feeling, like it being hard. So looking at it like, oh, dieting was hard, the training was hard, the everything about this endeavor is openly hard and I have to be tough to do it and resilient to get through it. But in the actuality, it's this choice you made for an endeavor, and it's kind of like a gift because you're not necessarily inherently starving. It's very, very hard, but it's a gift that you did it. And it's like this perspective of what I think is actually resilience is that you do these hard things to be inherently resilient, but you chose it. So I think the real resilience comes when you did not choose the obstacle. So then that's where I draw this contrast is this chosen bodybuilding hard that was perceived for me to be very difficult, and a story that I told myself. It was hard, but it was a chosen journey and it was a gift to do so, compared to, say, the last head injury that I'm still currently recovering from, where that was hard because I didn't choose it. I had to go through this scenario where a lot of things that I find value in life are pushing. It's like really working hard in my professional endeavors and really working hard in my physical endeavors. And then all of a sudden, now what? I have to take 25% of my daily working load. Like, what does that mean? That's not just training load. It's the working load of what I have to do day to day. So that's the professional endeavors. That's the personal relationships. That's like everything. I can't go to a movie theater and look at the screen for 2 hours. And so basically going back where I take 100% of my workload and being forced to go down to, say, 10% of a workload. Now, I think this is the inherent difference of appearing tough and being actually resilient. Is the appearing tough was choosing a hard in an endeavor and basically boasting about the difficulty of it and, oh, I do hard things, versus resilient is the ability to work through obstacles that I think were unplanned. Now, do I believe that those chosen obstacles definitely help you for those unchosen obstacles? But I think there's this outwardly tough appearance in the things that are visually hard, like, say, going through a prep or like physically hard training, etc. But then resilience is a lot of times these unseen challenges that aren't so obvious that somebody's going through, and developing toughness, but not this outward toughness in what would be appeared because of physical, like, say, hard physical training or an endeavor, and this contrast between bodybuilding and getting really lean, muscular, for, say, needing to take a step back and develop coping mechanisms to this unplanned challenge.
It's interesting that you frame it that way, Nate, because I also think, like, in that dichotomy that you've laid out, there's also this piece around some of the things that appear outwardly tough are also things that are like socially validated. Like, you as a bodybuilder going through prep would have been like patted on the back by other bodybuilders who are like, you know, you're doing a great job, dude. Or you get up on stage and you get validation for like the payoff of that effort, right? Versus some of those private tough things that people struggle with that are happening behind the scenes. Nobody knows it's happening. There is no glory or social validation for your struggle. And sometimes there's even like social, like, side eye for your struggle because you're needing to like step back and appear to do less, right? But it's behind the scenes, you're working harder than you were on the other thing. It's requiring more of you in terms of your mental toughness to get through it. But it doesn't have the same social reward attached to it that makes it hard.
Yeah, and I think it's big because it's one of my beliefs in the importance of doing physically hard things is to prepare yourself and your capacity to go through endeavors over time for those unplanned things, which is really quite interesting. And it's Magness suggests that real toughness requires listening to your body and emotions, and how we can learn to distinguish discomfort that builds us from discomfort that breaks us.
Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts on that?
That's a huge one to me. I'm learning to become better at listening to my body. I have shared with Nate before that, like, for me, thinking about like the different domains of what it means to be a human, I had fully developed and overdeveloped many other domains, like mental, emotional, relational, and then left physical like on the back burner until recently. And so I'm still figuring out how to read the body cues, although I'm getting much better at it. But for me, the emotions piece is where like that's my wheelhouse. And one of the things I have loved about this book, and because it's not a perfect book, but I do really love it, is because it very much, he uses the same cognitive and emotional model for understanding how people experience stress and become tough, is the same one that I use in the type of therapy I do, which is called dialectical behavior therapy. And it is all about how do we regulate our emotions, in what ways are our emotions valid, how do they come up, and then what do we do with them. And so much of what I was learning in this book was really about how do I apply all the expertise that I have from the type of therapy that I do, but apply it to myself as it relates to not mental health things, but related to like doing hard things. So where the emotion piece comes into it is this. He gives us early on this model of kind of what happens when we are facing hard things. And it's like that we have the emotional experience, and then we have thoughts that are evaluating whatever the experience is. So we have an emotional reaction, we have thoughts that evaluate it. Sometimes we have additional emotions in response to that. And then on the basis of kind of how we have evaluated the situation and the emotions we're experiencing, we're going to have an urge to take an action of some kind. And so sometimes that is to like persist, and sometimes it is to flee the situation, to quit what we're doing and to get out of it. And so to me, a real core piece of this is about that emotion regulation piece, and about you need to be familiar enough with your emotions, because emotion regulation isn't about dismissing your own feelings and ignoring your emotions to push through and be tough. It's about being familiar enough with your emotions to be able to listen to what is the wisdom of what my emotion is trying to tell me right now. What is unhelpful in what my emotions are trying to push me to right now? How do I regulate that so that I can make a conscious choice going forward? He talks about having that calm conversation with yourself. And so for me, that piece, that emotional intelligence to be able to name, to tolerate, to sit with your own emotions, to then figure out like, okay, what is helpful in this emotion and what is not helpful in this emotion? And how do I use that to move forward in a way that is consistent with my goals, is a huge thing. And people don't like, fortunate are the people who have emotional wiring that is pretty balanced and were raised by parents who role modeled what it looked like to identify and express your emotions in adaptive ways. But most of us weren't. And so I find that this is like a lot of my professional life has been about helping people develop that skill of like, how do you recognize your emotions? How do you name them? How do you process them? What are they trying to tell you? And I find that lots of people are still figuring this out. So that's the emotion piece for me. But I'm going to turn it back to you for the emotion piece, but also if you have some wisdom about what the body tells you.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question for me, because it kind of compares two contrasts of what the chosen struggle is and what the unchosen struggle is, and two things that I've come to lots of terms with in my endeavors. So it's like, one, this bodybuilding in a bodybuilding journey and developing the ability to push past what the system's telling you, and intentionally needing to be able to turn that system off and inherently to shut off the feelings. And what I'll draw upon, very specific context. One morning, didn't sleep very well, had to get up at 3 a.m. I needed to be doing cardio by 6 a.m. to, say, take care of my life duties, and very exhausted. It's basically the last 6 weeks of prep. This is about 3 weeks out. I'm dropping roughly about 1 to 2 pounds a day. I'm eating roughly about 1,100 calories and having close to what would be a 6,000, 5,500 estimate expenditure per day. And I had 60 minutes of cardio, and I didn't sleep a wink because my sympathetic nervous system is out of control. And I was very tired. I get going on the elliptical in my building's basement. It's dark. I'm just like, I've been shutting my feelings off for weeks. And I was really not feeling good this day. Like, I didn't know if I could do it. And I was just going on the elliptical. And I remember just thinking, I was just like, you know what? How long until I die. like I'm on this elliptical right now, how long until I die? Like, how long until I absolutely shut down and somebody has to carry me out of here and I don't make it? And I was like, oh, I got a long time. And so it was basically learning this ability to completely shut off all signals and get what I needed to get done. Now, that draws into the useful tool of being able to develop that in an chosen endeavor and being able to distinguish what was actually life-threatening or negative at the time. And so what I draw this parallel is to this mountaineering experience now that I have, where 70% of the deaths that happen on these mountains, the bigger ones anyway, are happening on the way down. So it's an interesting tape, and he discusses it in this book, is that when you're in the wild and these mountains, there's a lot going on. So let's talk about, say, the altitude and the weather and the cost of going to that zone, say the bodybuilding zone, that maybe all you had was to get to the top. And if you had to push that hard to get to the top, well, let's talk about, let's say, a 3-day endeavor to get to the top. And imagine it's another 2 days back and you've gone to that place. It's like you might not make it back down. So I like one of the things he discussed is basically what's tough there. Is tough choosing to die on that mountain and forgo everything you had in the world that meant something to you just to conquer that peak? Or is tough being able to distinguish that you weren't quite ready on that day, the weather was too bad, you weren't in the physical condition, and being able to make it back down for another day? And I think being able to distinguish from this type of thing that builds versus this type of thing that destroyed is hard, but I think it inherently comes from finding that line safely. And this is one of the things where I find, I would say, is the most important thing in today's society is people to have good training habits and to have gone to these places in safe environments. Now, sometimes there's some context in gyms that we do need to distinguish from, say, what real pain is and what training pain is. But the best way to learn how to distinguish from these intentionally, what would see, it doesn't have to be, I'm an extreme end and I'm drawing extreme conclusions, but that's kind of where my brain always falls, is like that we have to be able to develop this understanding of us. And you talked about the emotional side and your ability to connect to the physical side through the emotional side. But my understanding was connecting to the emotional side from the physical side. So I think when we introduce training to humans, we basically have to learn these things. Like, let's talk about something very little, like something we introduced in your training. Like, let's talk about running for 2.5 minutes straight versus running for an hour straight. And what would be the necessary requirements to run 5 kilometers straight, or the necessary requirements from running 500 meters straight. And so we need to have you conditioned to that stress mentally and physically. We need your joints and your movement patterns to be developed and not broken past an extreme. And I like the running thing here because you have, say, I love David Goggins. Like, I love the extreme side of it, but it is only a tool for that extreme side when it's necessary, where dying on a mountain is not tough. Turning back home to maybe not do it again, but maybe have another endeavor, what I would say is tough in that context. So on the David Goggins continuum of running, kind of told you, run that 5K and break your feet and don't stop unless you die. That's not good for you as a human being who's, what would you say, desiring to increase their fitness qualities. What's more important than intensity is your ability to improve. So that we started at, say, 2.5 minutes and worked your way up to be able to run, let's say, 30, 60 minutes straight. On that continuum, with subsequent intensities building up, you will learn what where to distinguish this because of the consequence from the recovery aspect. And this is where I'll conclude on here, is that you'll learn along the journey what was too far. And you really need to learn what was too far, and you'll know it because you can't consistently improve if you dig too deep into the hole. So if you develop patellar tendonitis in your knee and you have to stop running, that wasn't very tough. You didn't even make it to the 5K. What was tough was to learn when the cost outweighed the benefit, because having you continually improve, it's much better than outwardly displaying this aspect of toughness. And so where I think we learn to build this distinguished path is understanding the gravity of what we're trying to do and having subsequent intensities increased in the given endeavor that are manageable, and that you'll build a capacity to understand what was too far or not far enough by having a manageable increase that you were able to keep improving versus having to dig a big hole to then keep moving. Because for most of us, it's not an extreme thing that we need to do when we're introducing fitness qualities, and that building this mental toughness doesn't start from running 100 miles with broken feet. It starts from just overcoming, let's say, that one training obstacle day in and day out, and eventually what I would say is building 100 reasons and 100 little wins that would lead up to a human who could run X distance or do X endeavor.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on your end on that spiel?
Yeah. As much as I appreciate David Goggins, and I really appreciate his memoir and his willingness to share his story, because I think it's inspirational to a lot of people, he's not necessarily a great role model for how to do it yourself, because his way of doing it literally broke him and would crush a lot of people. I think he, for me, in my mind's eye, as much as I have respect for him, I think he kind of is that picture of what that old school toughness looks like. But to bring it back to this book, one of the things, I've been flipping through my notes to try and find it, and I can't, but I know one of the things that Steve Magness talks about is when it comes to building toughness, you've got to raise the floor and lower the ceiling. And so it's this idea of like you build up your window of tolerance over time. You don't compare, like when you're out the gate, you don't compare yourself to David Goggins at his peak, because he didn't start out at his peak either. He started where he started, 100 pounds overweight and whatever. And so this idea of raising the floor is like investing in your training, investing in those 1% improvements, investing in kind of building up that foundation for yourself so that the floor, the minimum capacity that you're able to do is better than it was at the start of the training block, right? And lowering the ceiling in terms of like what you're aiming for is not about aiming for, say, what David Goggins was able to do on his 100K race, but instead comparing it to what do you think your best is going to be on that? And so that the ceiling that you're aiming for yourself is the best of what your training has set you up for success with, and maybe stretch a little bit beyond that. But that if by doing that, we do trend over time to improve both our floor and our ceiling over time, but in ways that are sustainable and that don't break us as we go. It is kind of building up in terms of that toughness, not just our physical capacities, but also in terms of, like you say, going into, say, bodybuilding in that prep phase. Physically, like you can tell your coaching clients, okay, this is what you're going to do in prep. You got to do this exercise. You're going to eat this food. You're going to sleep this amount, whatever. And they can do it, but if they don't have the mindset and haven't built up over time the mental toughness to be able to, like you say, put themselves in that starvation place while also outputting enough physical effort to maintain their muscle, it's going to crush them, right? So you build up their tolerance for that over time as well. And so I really liked that in this, that about being tough isn't about kind of setting your sights on the peak of the mountain and anything else is failure. It's about investing in the training that will make you successful at getting both up and down the mountain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it plays out into that my skill set and your skill set into putting intentional plans together to help people build that resilience. And I think it's cool. And so as a coach and a therapist, like I can say for you as a therapist, how do you help others build resilience without defaulting to this bravado of like the old school sort of tough love model, or say shutting off the emotions and just doing it per se?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think a lot of it in my line of work anyway, I work with a lot with folks who maybe struggle with regulating their emotions. That's kind of the core feature of many of the people that I work with. And sometimes what that struggle can look like is actually not people who are super emotional, but actually people who are really emotionally restricted and do lots of like distraction or numbing or like other things that keep them from needing to sit with their feelings. Because when they try and sit with their feelings, it's a real uncomfortable experience. And then also people do lots of self-destructive things sometimes from an emotional place, and self-destructive in the sense of sometimes literally, but also sometimes just in terms of like undermining their long-term goals. So for me, it's about that. When you want to talk about like raising the floor and lowering the ceiling, it's about building up people's windows of tolerance for being able to sit with their own emotions, right? And so sometimes part of that is about understanding what are your different emotions, what are the types of things that come up. How can you distinguish, say, between when am I feeling disappointed versus when am I feeling jealous, or when am I feeling frustrated versus when am I feeling angry? Like there's nuance to that, and understanding yourself, and then building up a person's window of tolerance. And you need to have kind of a dual set of skills. So one is the skills of being able to name and recognize those emotions, understand what their purpose is, and know then what are they trying to motivate us to do that is helpful and productive. But then also having a second set of skills for, okay, if it's not helpful for me to actually be as intense as I am right now, or to act on this, even if the emotion makes a total sense, taking action on it right now is not going to be helpful for me. You need a second set of skills for being able to then regulate the emotions just for the moment. So some short-term strategies are actually appropriate to kind of get through the moment of crisis. And then on the other side of the crisis, then you can go back to some of those other strategies. So that's kind of how we do things in therapy when it comes to regulating the emotions and building up that toughness that enables people to, because some people will avoid feeling their feelings because it feels as though it's a stick of dynamite that if they light that fuse, they're going to blow up. And sometimes that's with anger, but sometimes it's blow up with sadness or anxiety or depression. And that fear of experiencing your full emotional spectrum keeps people stuck in some pretty maladaptive patterns. And so, yeah, so it's about just supporting people with kind of understanding it and then teaching the skills for, like I said, crisis management, but also then the skills for then processing in healthy ways. What does it look like?
Well, it's now it's like I gotta riff that bit because that was good. I like that. One of the quotes that sticks out to me is that suppressing emotions doesn't make you strong; it makes you numb. And I think this is really interesting. And I think I'm gonna choose on some personal stuff for me because it's just like it highlights sort of the emotional journey to become the man that I am, past like say just physical endeavors and who I am as a human being over like say fitness qualities, which is very common for me to sort of think about in my stuff, and like this building the best people versus what would be, so let's say the strongest, the most jacked, you could run long, but what's the best human being? And in my philosophy, the best human being is going to be the one who also takes care of their physical side as well as their emotional side. Like think about this complete being. And I think with one of the things that basically the author's gone over is kind of this complete human being thing, like this, that going all in and numbing yourself in this given endeavor and putting out this boisterous toughness doesn't necessarily develop you for the long run. And I think it makes me think of when I lost my dad and the fear of the consequences of the genetic condition that he passed away from in myself, but also the combination of losing my dad and somebody that I never really had a great relationship with over time. And then I never got to have a great relationship over time. By the time that I became a man that would have understood his challenges and him doing the best he can, I had lost him. But saying that continuum, I got really numb. Like it was this cold. To manage the pain inside, I got very analytical. And it lined up really well with bodybuilding and my education. It was like, okay, well, school, learning, bodybuilding, going through pain, not listening to my feelings, and just doing what I needed to do to get the endeavor done. And okay, yeah, and it's like, okay, cool. Awesome. I was ready to lock in, and I got through all these very hard things that I think were very beneficial to me. But like, it was viewed as a struggle. And I think that's a different thing to when it kind of came to the continuum of losing my mom, is then I had to deal with all these emotions. It's like I had blocked out 3 years of emotions, and then now it kind of all blew up in my face. So this conventional ability to suppress my emotions and do these hard things did not serve me well when I had to deal with my emotional side. So I think it's really interesting trying to develop emotional resilience in people. And like you mentioned here, and I want to kind of connect it back to what I do with people physically on that same spectrum, that it's a very specific process for me with helping build people resilience and not getting into the what I would say the bravado of just kind of being tough, is this intentional process of developing awareness, so that if we have this continuum, and kind of what I touched on earlier, is that if we have a human and we look at what they've been subjected to, I wouldn't take somebody who's never run or never resistance trained and absolutely thrashed them. That would make them have a horrible negative experience, just like taking somebody who had never dealt with their emotions and just taking them too deep into that pathway could be too much of that given timeline. And then so with people, I think it's really important that with doing things physically hard to then connect to ourself, but it's about the continuum over time, that if we do hard things continuously, intentionally, we'll build resilience for those unintentional things. But we have to start with this continuum of what's recoverable. So we need to recover, because the process isn't sort of train, grow. It's train, recover, grow. And then there's going to be a period, and then do it all over again. So then with people, to what I would say is developing intentional resilience in humans, is that we take a manageable stress. So this is something like, okay, if we only have a human being who doesn't resistance train very much, starting them with let's say 2 workouts a week over 6 workouts a week is a better process, and then building that way up. When I would say kind of the conventional wisdom you'll find right now is basically ram into that and then just keep doing it, and you're going to adapt. But what that does is it leaves a continuum of this small percentage of people who had, let's say, the physical and mental tools previously to make it through, but then everybody else perishes along the way. And then so, and I don't believe that has to be the process for everybody.
No.
So if we take, oh yeah,
sorry, I should say, and it leaves people with the illusion that then, oh, this isn't for me because I wasn't able to do it the way the next guy did, that he was successful with it. I wasn't able to just jump in at 6 days a week. Then it must mean that this isn't for me. And we see lots of people drop out. Yeah.
And I think it's big because if we give people more stress than they're able to recover from, but also to learn a path to enjoy the journey along the way, we need to start with giving people a manageable stress that they can improve on. And because a lot of times what you'll have is people who struggle with exercise initially, a lot of times are people who've had a lot of self-induced losses and this belief in themselves falling lower, and that they had, let's say, 1,000 losses to adhere to that training plan, and every loss then became a compounding obstacle to overcome. And then so with implementing exercise and training, we want to start small and have all the wins happen first, where this just what I would say is this kind of old bravado, ramming into training and do it until we adapt and get freaking jacked. Okay, all right, this small group of people is going to have a fun time with that if they love it, if they love it. But this other side of the coin of people who want to implement and make these exercise changes and they're just starting in, that's like the worst possible advice, is acting tough and blasting into it and doing the hardest workout possible and then just adhering for 6 weeks before we die and fall off, versus this manageable plan where we take what we can do and then we build up what's recoverable in it. And let's say it's 2 times a week at a training frequency that we can handle and training intensity we handle. If we build the capacity to show up and do it consistently, and we build up the amount of volume somebody's subjected to over time versus ramming through intensity at the beginning, we're going to build people who are a little bit, what I would say is have more tolerance early, and that they're going to be able to handle that intensity later. When it's like, if you just ram into intensity, you're not going to have the subsequent underlying capacity to handle volume over time, and your intensity is going to put you into this, say, red zone where we can't recover from. And then so it's this, I would say the best way to help build people with resilience is actually to start off not too intense and to start off very light and build a lot of wins and enjoyment and progress through self-engineering success, where it's like, let's look at it like just simple. If I wanted to have more energy and I developed more cardiovascular capability from what would be an aerobic capacity standpoint, and then I just got somebody to do 10,000 steps a day and built up 10,000 steps a day versus ramming somebody into the hardest possible cardiovascular conditioning program and not having them succeed. If I have somebody who can just adhere to building up more steps per day, let's say in a capacity standpoint, and I engineer some success in that of what's manageable, like not say blasting into 10,000 steps, but building your way up. If we increase a simple thing that people can do that is going to engineer success, they're going to be more resilient over time, because then they're going to, what you'd say is, I would say, develop the love for it, because they start to see the improvement, and then they start to get manageably more resilient over time and be able to handle the intensity down the road.
Yeah. It's funny to hear you describe it, Nate, because it's exactly what you did with me. And I'm just like, oh, this is exactly what I did. But you're so right. It's about like setting people up for success. Another piece I'd like to build on to that is that that comes from the therapy world, but I think feeds into the coaching as well, is that then when there are missteps, when people make a mistake or they things don't go to plan, the way we teach people to respond to those instances as well is also really important for resilience. Because say, like I work with people who struggle with addiction. And so when I'm working with somebody who say has a lapse into say alcohol use, how we respond to that also helps build resilience over time. Because if we treat it like you weren't tough enough, it was a huge failure, you're a screw up, you're just going back into your old addiction cycles. Like there are some people that kind of tough love is effective for, but I would suggest that they are the minority. My experience has been that instead responding to things like, okay, that sucks, you're not proud of yourself, what did we learn from it? How can we learn to be smarter the next time? What is it that was the trigger? What was going on with you mentally, emotionally, socially? What environment were you in, so that we can understand how to set you up better for success the next time? And I imagine that also comes in coaching too. Like say if somebody's working up to a race or a bodybuilding show and doesn't get the performance that they want. I imagine you as a coach, as you break down the performance, either sets them up for further toughness and resilience in the face of that setback versus an approach that might take some of the fun or the enthusiasm for persisting out of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of makes me transition on this thought of compassion. And it's something that I talk a lot about lately, kind of in the coaching aspect and skills I've developed now is the tools. So it's like compassion. And I like this quote that Steve made. And the compassion, not just for others, but yourself, is a performance enhancer. And I think a lot of times we have people who don't have necessary tools to be successful. I like the concept that he touched on this learned helplessness aspect, where if you take somebody who doesn't have the tools to be successful and you say, try harder, you're setting somebody up for failure. And I'm do a little quick sum of one of the studies that I think I really liked that he brought up is with the dogs. And basically that they had some research and they set up with these dogs. And then that they had these dogs and there was a shock developed in this cage. And so they had two groups. They had one group of dogs that they shocked and that they taught them how to turn off the shock or avoid it. They basically would shock them and they had this button and the dogs learned how to press the button to stop the shock. But then they had this other group of dogs that they did not teach how to press a button and these dogs were getting shocked and they had nothing to do about it. And then they put both these dogs and they put them in the same environment and they shocked them. But what they did in this one is they created a clear exit strategy that a dog should be able to otherwise understand where it could exit to get away from the pain. And then so they shocked these dogs. The ones that they taught how to press the button jumped out of the confinement. The dogs that did not learn how to press the button did not jump out of the confinement, and they sat there whining and were helpless in this environment. And I think I see that a lot when people are faced with this continuum of just being rammed into training and they don't have the tools to be successful. So what happens is they've been taught through their own environment, whether it was when they were younger or how many failures they've had, that they've taught that they can't be successful in this given endeavor. And then they've had countless times where people tried to ram them into it. And it's funny when we go back to you, we've had this timeline together, is when you first came to me in Edmonton. One of the first things that the person who was introducing me to you told me is that she doesn't want to get pushed. She doesn't want a trainer who's going to yell at her. And then we talked about it initially, and you talked about how you brought that up immediately. You're like basically immediately expressing some arms standing out about intensity, which I think is big in this cultural conditioning of what we need to do to train people. So long story short is if you take somebody who's just had countless failures or been taught that changing themselves physically and mentally is not something that's possible, ramming that person into intensity right away, whether it's emotional or physical, is going to be an extremely bad scenario that's not going to allow that human being to grow because they've been taught to be helpless. And then so from a coaching standpoint, it's really important to take this person and to teach them that understand the tools that they have and give them tools to be able to overcome this obstacle, which could be losing weight, getting stronger, increasing energy, getting jacked, being the physically most fit version of yourself, whatever it is that we have to give them the tools. And the tools involve a whole bunch of other contexts, but one, we have to have some belief. And then so ramming somebody into an intensity that further validates why they can't do it is going to be an extremely negative thing. And telling somebody to try harder who doesn't have the proper tools is going to just create a worse scenario. And then so with compassion, we have to have compassion for other people as a coach, and we have to understand that they might not have the tools to be successful. And then we have to engineer success over just ramming into intensity.
Agreed. And it's so that study is a really famous one that for a while, some of the theories about depression kind of cited that study, and about how maybe that's part of what happens when people get depressed, is that there's a learned helplessness that comes into it. But what was interesting, there was like subsequent studies that actually then looked at the opposite, which is you can also teach people optimism. And so thinking about like the dogs, it's the difference between a dog that was taught that none of its actions made a difference, no matter what it did. If it pressed a button or tried to get out of the cage, it didn't matter. It was going to get a shock. It learned to be helpless. But they also taught the dogs that you can push a button and you can get out of the cage. There's no need for you to sit there and be shocked. And those dogs were much more optimistic, I suppose, or resilient, depending on how you want to frame it. They were just better at kind of problem solving about like, how do I get out of a situation that I don't want to be in? And I think we can teach those skills to humans too. Humans learn them, I think, sometimes, as you noted. I like the way you phrase that about kind of these I think you said self-inflicted failures. But that sometimes it's just about how we let ourselves down. We make a commitment to ourselves, but we don't keep it. And maybe that's because we set the bar too high, right? We thought we were going to do the 75 hard and we got 5 days into it and burned out, right? But then what we believe is, for some reason, we believe that, oh, it's not the program that was the problem. I was the problem. I didn't follow through and do the things that I said I was going to do. And so I think sometimes with humans, and that's whether it's in exercise or it's in addiction recovery or anything else, part of it is about then looking at what is the story that I'm telling myself. And so Steve Magness also talks about that in the book too, in terms of that one of the cognitive strategies that we can use is reframing, looking at what is the story we are telling ourselves about the situation we're in, and how does that change your experience of it. And if you don't mind me hijacking this book club for a minute, I'm curious to ask you a question about, like, do you have an example of a time where you have been in a situation where the story you realized the story you were telling yourself was not helpful, and so you told yourself a different story and it helped change how you approached the situation?
Yeah. Okay. Obviously, I think I'm gonna go to a deep one. I just think it's helpful over just these kind of day-to-day things and the extremes. I don't know. I always go to the extremes. I think with myself and my father passing away from ALS, and then having the genes passed on, and having this obstacle of what I like to usually kind of correlate it to is these two things, is the cross I bear and the burden that only I could bear, and this story that I tell myself, versus the initial story of this. And then so let's say at time younger, and when I lost my dad, it felt like the only thing I could do, like, there was a really, really dark period in my life, because the only thing that had ever truly helped me over time was my physical body. Like, it was always the answer. The escape from pain was training. The escape from my life was sport. And it was like the community, it was the love. I developed a deep love for pushing myself. But what I developed is what I would say a coping mechanism that was 100% controllable. I could always train something, and I could always improve on something. First time in my life that my physical body was going to be the failure. That, say, the omnipotent universe, that my genes would eventually fail me to the fate that I was my worst nightmare, per se. But I think that compounding interest of time over just continually to always find something I could improve on, it helped me flip the script. Instead of what I would say is this nihilism about nothing mattering because it was all going to end in the consequence that I didn't want to happen in, or was like had the most fear from, into this change in, okay, well, what are the controllables here and the autonomy I have in this situation? So I know that one-on-one, that physical fitness in a dose-dependent relationship, so more fitness or say more training is longer lifespan, and having the, we would say, the longest timeline before onset of symptoms, then became the whole mission. So the fittest possible version of myself was going to have the longest possible outcome with the most physical capabilities. And that this story changed myself. And I really like in the book, he talked about a lot of autonomy in humans and focusing on the controllables, that when you feel like you have more autonomy, you're going to feel more in control, and you're going to feel like you have some sort of hand in this. So for me, what was an incredibly hard obstacle where, kind of like I could have just shut down if I had never seen something that I could have improved on per se, or if I had been the person who had just hadn't countlessly found something I could improve on and turned the heaviest things I had to deal with the biggest parts of my story. And then so what that translated to is I had two paths. One story, okay, sure, maybe like it doesn't matter, and maybe the timeline is set, and I could view things that way. But if I just tell a story to myself that I have some control over this, I'm just going to exist happier. But even further, that kind of became my mission statement, is that the fittest version of myself, I believe, is the healthiest version of myself, and what I would say, the mentally most well version of myself. And over time, that's going to let me live the highest quality of life. But then there's this burden I have to bear on what could be an inherently a concept that I could just give up on. And taking control and finding some sort of autonomy in the obstacle you're dealing with is the single most important thing you could do to help yourself deal with that obstacle, because you're just going to feel like you have some control in it. And so just finding the controllable and gaining some autonomy is going to totally flip the script from learned helplessness to realizing that you do have some control and you have some autonomy. And if you find that thing that you can lean into that is the controllable and develop on it, then you're going to find meaning in life versus this sort of nihilistic belief that nothing matters.
Yeah. I love how you've flipped the script on that, Nate. And I also, I love that he talks about that. I think he literally, there's this one story that he tells where he uses the phrase to flip the script, where he was talking about working with an athlete who she would get really anxious before every race and she would always throw up. And then because she was going to throw up, it was throwing off like her performance and she was getting in her head about it and super anxious. And they tried like managing the anxiety, but nothing was stopping her from throwing up before every race. And so instead they decided to figure out, okay, what can we control? Let's decide like, okay, we know you're going to throw up. When would you like to do that? When in your warm-up do you want to fit that in? And so even when it seems like it might be an arbitrary thing that you're exerting some control over, in her case, like, okay, I know I'm going to throw up, I can't control it, but when am I going to do that? When would it be most convenient? That really changed things for that athlete. And I think that that piece about focusing on what we can control really does help shift people's mindsets, and in small ways, but also in big life-changing ways, like the way you've chosen to reframe things for yourself, right? I think there's a thing I see on the internet from time to time, and it always hits me in my core, is that we are skeletons wearing meat suits powered by electricity on a rock hurtling through space. And that either means that nothing means anything, or it means that everything means something. And then we get to choose what we think it means, right?
Yeah. And like on the philosophical side of things, it's funny how it's like you can say, okay, well, like nothing means anything.
Yeah.
Or it's like nothing means anything. That means everything means something. And like it kind of leads into this question is what stories have you internalized about pain, strength, and vulnerability? And are they helping or harming your evolution?
Oh boy, how vulnerable do we want to be?
I know, right?
Right? That's a real deep one, Nate. Because I think that when I was younger, given the circumstances that I grew up in, and I'm not trying to like shit talk my family or anything like that. I think it's just like my parents were doing their best, and their best was not what I needed a lot of the time.
That's your experience. So there's nothing inherently wrong about sharing it.
Exactly. And I think that a lot of the time, I think I told myself that that pain meant to like you martyr yourself to a bigger cause. That's what was role modeled for me, and that I internalized that message, and that suffering for a bigger cause was a worthwhile thing to do. But the type of suffering I was doing and that was role modeled for me wasn't for a bigger cause in terms of like some other aspirational thing. It was in service of a narcissist. And it's like, so this is not like the bigger cause is just about like, oh, keeping the peace in the house and making sure somebody doesn't get explosive, and really making yourself smaller to make other people happier was the path to peace. And so it romanticizes the pain in the sense that you think like, I'm doing it, I'm being the good daughter, I'm doing what's supposed to be for my family, I'm doing what it's expected. And then the problem is it doesn't just stay in your family, you then take that into your relationships, and you get into relationships with toxic people where you make yourself smaller, and you think that that's what's expected of you. And it wasn't until like I was older that I just realized like, what am I doing to myself? I was a really late bloomer in terms of like getting my shit together. And you and I have talked about this, but for the people who are listening in and don't know me, like I didn't get my shit together until I was like 33 is when I really started to get my life on track. The first 33 years was a hot mess of just experimentation and putting myself in situations that were painful. And it was in realizing that like the greater good is not served by me being small, by me trying to diminish myself in service of bigger personalities. I don't even know that I've answered your question, Nate, but that's the thing that came up for me as I was thinking about it.
I think it's incredibly like I identify with that. Do you have a little bit more on that?
No, I think it's just the question was about like, what are the stories that we tell ourselves around pain? So
is it helping or harming you?
Harming. Yeah, it was 100% harming. It's no longer. And I want to say like part of where I'm at right now was how I got to where I am was in unpacking that story. And I think that's also why I feel comfortable sharing it, is because like, that's not the place that I'm in right now. And if other people are resonating with that part of the story, it's like, I want them to know there's a path out for them too, because, it is absolutely harmful, and it is sometimes really tough to do that work of like building up your tolerance, like to bring it back to like that physical fitness parallel, right? You're starting from somebody who's really deconditioned and you want them to get fit. Like there's a real stepwise path forward in terms of, building up tolerance, building up fitness, building up different capacities in the person. And the same thing happens emotionally, particularly when you're talking about unpacking the stories that you've been told that you inherited in your family from when you were younger. Those don't unpack quickly. There's no 12-week self-help book that I could tell you like, go and do this 12-week program and you're going to be fixed, right? Like it's about a stepwise progression, and it's often in relationship to other people that are healthy and can, just help you step forward, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting. It's like this question. I think I really is really deep for me because of like the choice to go down a nihilistic way of thinking versus the choice to see the beauty in every day. And I did have this choice presented in front of me. And I think one of the things I've been able to do consistently over time is have a story that I tell myself that is inherently positive. But it incents to get over a certain endeavor. And so I'll paint a story that plays into this, and two tangents of one that I think is helpful and one that I think was not so helpful. My dad died, and I internalized the possibility of also passing away from the same fate, of the same genetic condition, and that being my worst nightmare. And so I locked into that. This is my cross. Like this is the thing I have to bear, and I'm gonna be tough through it, and I'm gonna be unstoppable. Because when it happened, I was in a prep for a bodybuilding show, and I used that internalized pain to absolutely push myself to the brink of like the very brink for that bodybuilding show, and I loved it. I loved that I was able to. And I learned, this is a real important story, is I learned I could turn that pain into something productive. But what happened in this transition is I also learned to romanticize that struggle. And I started not really being able to be comfortable with happy. So then I got to a point where I was actually in, I would say, a stable environment, and it was like I wasn't comfortable there. What could I destroy here to cause some negative that then I need to overcome? It's like I romanticized the pain, like that the journey I had to go through, the pain. So it's kind of like, it's interesting because getting to a show and getting 4.0 in school when I had always been told I was stupid and dyslexic and struggled through school most of my life. Okay, that was pretty freaking helpful. But romanticizing the struggle and not being able to find anything meaningful in the universe other than pain, that's probably not the most adaptive thing. But when I lost my mom, it then, I would say it, and it's like I got to get really real here because the only thing that makes sense is that I was on a cycle coming off one of my bodybuilding shows, and the goal was to get as huge as freaking possible. Tail end of COVID, BC gyms shut down over Christmas, and I didn't go home to see my mom because the gym shut down. I didn't go home because the gym shut down, and that would have not allowed me to work out for fucking 7 days. That was a reason not to go home. And then my mom died that weekend. And so I had to, and then I battled this continuum for a while that I chose to not go home, and I chose to not see my mom because of this self-gratifying quest to be the biggest possible human in what was the endeavor that I associated with being my life's purpose, if I was going to suffer the same fate as my dad. Now, that's a whole bunch to freaking unpack, but what it did is it made me kind of look at it. It just made me like, what is that? What the fuck is that? What is that thing? You're telling me I got so locked into this journey that nothing meant anything anymore, and that I romanticized the pain, and that, but what it meant is that cross per se, and I like the analogy, it just makes a lot of sense. And it's like that cross became everything. That obstacle became the freaking sole point of view. That was everything, was this obstacle. And then when I lost my mom, I had to get in touch with that emotional side. And I went through this journey of getting out of this romanticizing the pain to this, what I would say is love of every day, and this embracing the not having forever, and this passion for life over romanticizing that struggle and being so locked into the endeavor that I don't even stop to smell the roses that endeavor allowed to say bloom per se. And so this inherently in the story that I tell myself and the pain that I suffered is one of the yin and yang. If the side of me that learned what I had to do to deal with the pain to get shit done, and then this side of me to take this step back to reconnect with the world and my loves and my emotions, and then becoming what I would say is the best version of me that's ever existed, where I have the tools to overcome any obstacle, but I stop and smell the roses. And now that didn't happen over a day. It happened over, I would say, thousands and thousands of learning that I could overcome any obstacle. But in the long story short, that's a story. And I could not tell that story, and all that stuff would mean nothing. And it would just be this helpless existence of all the suffering that I've overcome. Or it could be the core parts of the character that I am and the superhero in this world that I've become. And I inherently believe that just finding some controllables, getting the autonomy, and trying to tell yourself positive stories about the character you are is inherently what I would say one of the most powerful things you can do for your evolution over time.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think like we've both kind of used like the cautionary tale about not like the distraction short term to like lock in and focus on a thing that's right in front of you can be a super effective short term strategy. And there's the shadow side of it, which is to say like you need to step back and see the bigger picture too. But it is a skill. It is a necessary skill sometimes. And I like that's one of the things that Steve Magness talks about is he talks about this idea of zooming in and zooming out, that they're two different strategies and there's a bunch of different ways that you can apply them. But to me, those are really the yin and yang you've presented is kind of a really great example of like zooming in is like getting super locked in and hyper focused on a specific outcome that is right in front of you. But then it's important to balance that with the ability to zoom out and look at like, okay, what is the bigger picture though about how this fits into what's important to me in a more global sense.
Yeah, I like that. I like that you touched on that because I think one of the things that I really liked about the book is this like sort of intentional attacking of the old bravado that doesn't necessarily help people. It could, but that it's inherently limiting. Like the only lever we can pull is shut up and do that, versus this multitude of levers and this bandwidth of possible ways to respond to a given adversity. And I think for me, it's like the overall or like overarching theme of this book is like, how do we get mentally tough? And mental toughness is only something that applies in the pursuit and moving forward through a given endeavor and overcoming obstacles. And I think it's just inherently, for me, I do believe mental toughness is the number one key to success. But I like this quote where he goes, resilience is not about blind perseverance. It's about discernment. And what I like about this quote is it's like, what does it really matter? And it's like, what's the inherent meaning for this endeavor per se? And it's like, what is this endeavor? Is this endeavor this fitness journey? Is this endeavor this emotional journey? A recovery from addiction? A change of physical capacity? That inherently we have to survive through this universe, and the meaning that we bring to it is essentially our experience, and that regardless of anything, there is going to be adversities. So I think this discerning between what would be the time to pull the lever in, let's say, kind of compartmentalizing stress and doing what we need to do to continue existing, versus the lever where we gotta, whoa, okay, let's unpack this thing that's going on. I think is really big, because along with the lever of just kind of pushing the freaking line is also the lever of kind of recovering, like in this multitude of skill set, when we need to lean in and when we need to, would say, take a step back and recover. I think is essentially, and it highlights to me this recent head injury that I've been recovering from, where, okay, all right, that this is not the time to freaking lock in and push through the training program or the workload that inherently I'm not going to recover psychologically or cognitively from my symptoms if I do that. But that's the thing I want to do the most. So it's like, that's not the lever. Like, this is not toughness in this given endeavor. This given endeavor is recovering. So the lever that I need to pull is meditation and increased sleep capacity and lowering the mental stresses and having this bandwidth of tools to develop. If the only thing that I have is pull this lever and shut the fuck up and get to work here, is like, okay, that is probably the worst possible thing I could do right now. And I need to have an understanding, okay, all right, this is a time to take a step back. This is not to increase the training load, but doesn't mean I stopped training. It doesn't mean that I stopped doing the thing in the meaningful suffering that I have. And I touch on this will sort of scoot into one of the big meanings, the overarching theme in the book is this man's search for meaning reference that I really liked at the end, where one of the keys to happiness is this meaningful suffering in the pursuit of something, like, it's something internal. It's not necessarily that the meaningful suffering we have is going to be the meaningful suffering of another. So for me, is I really do believe every one of these obstacles I've faced in the pursuit of my fitness endeavors have also, this is also all turned into the reason I've been able to move through this over time, where that there was this constant, and it was basically just, man, I love training. And then that training got connected with, would say the psychological version of me and unlocked the keys to my mind. But training was the meaning. So I think one of the biggest foundations of doing hard things and developing mental toughness is you got to have a reason you're doing that hard thing. And we have to conceptualize what it is. And sometimes you don't necessarily always know exactly what it is, and you might find it along the way. I like to think about it like the North Star, or I'm going to reference one of my good friends, Liam, and a quote. He always says that if you know the way broadly, you'll see it in everything. So if you have a meaning in your life and you just kind of know it broadly and you continue down that North Star and you just pursue it endlessly, and then that endless pursuit had a meaning that was internal, that you'll have this mission and you'll have a reason to continue to pursue through these obstacles. And so I think one of the most essential things to developing toughness and doing hard things is we have to find the reason we're doing these hard things. And sometimes you won't know the whole, let's say the whole concept initially, sometimes you'll find it along your way, but you have to have the reason.
Yeah. And I think you and I are both pretty abstract thinkers, and so we tend to go real big picture. But I think that perspective is really helpful, big picture wise, but it's also really helpful like in the concrete moments too. So big picture is things like, what is my mission? What is my meaning? What do I think my purpose in being the skeleton in the meat suit on the rock hurtling through space? Like, why this? Why this? And how you answer that question can be super helpful, but not everybody has an answer to that question. Not everybody necessarily has a sense of mission that they are consciously aware of. However, I think even if we can find our why and our purpose in the little moments too. So, for example, when I am on the air bike and I am hating every moment of being on the air bike, which I hate to admit this to you out loud, is that I don't hate it as much as I once hated it. But I used to loathe it with a fiery, burning passion. And I would just, part of hating it would be like, I'd be on it, I'm like, why am I doing this? This sucks. It's just so stupid. And I started telling myself a different story about it in terms of like, okay, it hurts and it is uncomfortable because it is the way I get better. I started thinking of myself as like, I am a plow horse choosing to put on this yoke to plow this field because that's how the field gets plowed. And that was just an analogy in my mind that was a metaphor for this is what it means to do the work. If you want to get fitter, if you want to get better, it means you put on the yoke and you plow the fucking field and you don't complain about it and it's not going to feel good and you don't do it because you like it. You do it because you want to finish the job. And this is how you do it. And so I think how we tell ourselves those stories, both in the big abstract ways, but also in those small concrete moments, are really helpful for mental toughness. Because for me, like I say, I need to admit that I no longer hate the air bike. Is not the worst part of my day. And part of it is because I have seen it, I've started to see it as being so purposeful. I've seen the results that come from investing in that particular effort, that particular discomfort, both mentally in terms of that mental toughness and physically in terms of cardiovascular health and just general fitness, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because it just lands right into the construct version of me. Like I'm just spilling off on this abstract meaning. It's funny because if we're looking at the physical being, we live in a physical world. Inherently not taking care of the machine that we live in is it will pay the price eventually. And that this VO2 max and lean body mass are the keys to fruitful life over time. And that this point when we don't have the youth anymore, we're going to question why we didn't take care of it when we had the capabilities. And for me, it's like, okay, this endeavor is developing the fittest version of myself, the fittest of the bloodline of the quest that I like to put it out as. And that if I take care of my heart and lungs and the efficiency of my system at the maximal ability for me to say break homeostasis and recover for it, I'm going to be ready for any physical obstacle that comes my way. And then inherently, there's obviously the I like trying to be jacked. Like that's fun too. But I think this meaning of keeping your VO2 max up and that keeping your lean body mass up so that you are the most resilient version of yourself over time. It's going to recover from injuries the fastest. It's going to have the most vitality. It's going to be what I would see the most equipped to handle psychological hard things. That we know when you continually to do hard things physically, you'll then build a capacity to go through hard things or a bandwidth to go through hard things mentally. And that part of your brain gets more developed. And so that if we imagine these creatures that we are and the creature we want to become, it's like that I wager the fittest, most muscular version of yourself down the road is the best creature that you could be, because the world you experience and the way your brain works is inherently going to be a better version of yourself, is going to be physically and mentally more tolerant, is going to be physically and mentally more able to withstand physical endeavors and mental endeavors that come up. And that I believe the number one way to increase mental toughness is to do hard things, and that the version of us that does hard things consistently and improves, continuously day in and day out, does those hard things, is going to develop the capacity to do hard things over time. And then that's going to translate into every area of your life and overcoming adversity, and that there will be adversity. There's always adversity. And then so if you develop a harder, what I would say, mind through thousands of wins of pushing through hard things physically, you'll develop a higher quality of life and the ability to pursue whatever endeavor you have more thoroughly, whether it is to get jacked or just to like be the best version of yourself at work, a best husband, the best wife, the best, whatever you can think of, that the fittest version of yourself is going to be the most capable version of yourself. And I believe that it's in a lot of ways, can be the most valuable work we put into ourselves over time.
Agreed. To bring it into the emotional as well, as I have gone through this journey myself, I have also come to appreciate how, like you say, that physical resilience translates into mental resilience and emotional resilience, that how I process stressors that happen in life are different now, in part because of having the gym as an outlet, but also just in part because my physical systems are more capable of handling it. And the other thing that it does is that for many people, a lot of their history of emotional unhealth, of not having healthy relationships, of not taking care of themselves, of making themselves small, or of coping with their emotions through maladaptive habits like substance misuse or anything else that you can think of that humans use to numb themselves. Healing that is in part through physical activity, because it is through getting fit that I have then been able to shed some of like the way I held those old ways of coping in my body. And I think even for like, I've seen like there's great research about how exercise is so helpful for people recovering from PTSD, and exercise is so helpful for people recovering from addiction. It is incredibly helpful for people who are recovering from mood disorders. So whether it's anxiety or depression, it is the pathway forward. That for me, that's not to say talk therapy like I do and skill building and things like that aren't also really important. They are absolutely essential. And I think that sometimes I was also guilty of this, of thinking that I could get myself psychologically and emotionally and relationally healthy, and that would mean that work was done. And so now I can start on the physical stuff. And as I started on the physical stuff, I realized, there were so many more layers of that emotional and psychological work I had to do that got peeled back once I started the physical journey too. They are, in my mind, they are no longer separate things. They are 100% meshed.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about the emotional groundwork that needs to be done. And it's like I just wager that when we take care of our physical self, that we're going to take care of our mental self to some capacity. We definitely always have a lot of work that should be done emotionally, where I like this analogy of looking more at this like kind of Eastern viewpoint of emotions, that like we're the beach and our emotions are something that's come and go, just like the tide. But the one thing I like that I think a little bit further is like this look at emotions like road signs, and that if we spent our whole life never being able to interpret how we felt about something, that we'd essentially find ourselves downtown Edmonton or Calgary and we don't know how to read. It's like we if we take care of ourselves mentally and we train hard, we're going to build this ability to do hard things. But we do need to spend groundwork building our emotional self, and we need to understand why we feel things and how to interpret our own emotions, and that nobody else in this world is responsible for our emotions. And if we learn to develop ourselves emotionally, that will find ourselves being able to interpret the road signs and be able to take ourselves to the internal destination that we would like to be at. And I think for me, in one of my mission statements, or I guess meanings over time, is that one of the most valuable intentional sufferings we can do is develop a skill set that aids other human beings, and that our intentional development of oneself to aid into the group cause of our society, or even our community, or say our interpersonal relationships, is going to take us home in a way. Like, we're going to find that meaningful suffering, and the connections we make are the real meaning in life. And so I think for me, one of the mission statements that has just gotten a little bit further, that I think is transitioning here, in that if we fully embrace the science and philosophy of real toughness, who might the creatures we become? And I think one of the most important things is that if we take care of our physical self and we do hard things over time, and we'll develop an ability to do hard things mentally, but we need to conceptualize what that, say, destination or experience, or the psychological place we'd like to be. And for me, this overcoming the impossible odds to just continually, day in and day out, be there for training and help people with training to connect to their physical self, and then connect through their physical self and connect to the what would be spiritual or psychological self, that's my mission statement. And that my ability and the meaning to help my community make it through the same adversities that I have, and even better, and get in touch with their physical power and the physical capability they can have if they choose so to do, is inherently why I keep doing this. And so I think if I fully embrace the concepts from this book and work on the bandwidth of the tools, and that if we have not just one way to do these hard things, we'll be able to, for me, more realistically help myself through obstacles that can't be overcome from just working harder and trying harder. And then I'll also help my community of people to work through their obstacles with tools other than just do it and just work harder. And there's a context to just do it and work harder sometimes, but that can't be the only lever.
100%. Yeah. I resonate with that so much. I think it's probably part of why you and I are friends, is that I think that we have similar senses of our mission in this world. And I think I shared with you once, I heard the quote from Bill Phillips, so the guy who used to do the Body for Life thing, but I think he was quoting somebody else, like a football coach or something like that. Anyway, the quote is this, that the best exercise a person can do is to reach down and lift someone else up. And from the time I heard that, it struck a chord deep in me about what is the whole point for any of us in what we're doing. And so I've seen my own journey as one of, as I learn things, not just intellectually in school, but as I learn and apply things in my own life, and I figure some things out and I get secure footing, I'm always immediately looking for, how can I share this with other people so that it's maybe not quite such a struggle. And I think professionally, a lot of what that has looked like, I loved your analogy about that we are the beach and our emotions are like waves. That's one of the analogies we use in dialectical behavior therapy, is that our emotions are like waves, and you can learn to ride the waves. The waves come, the waves go. You are not the waves. And sometimes I have seen myself, I kind of have this visualization of myself as I'm in a small boat out on a stormy sea, and I'm just trying to pull as many people out of the ocean as I can. And so it's not that we're not still in the stormy sea experiencing the waves, but that you're not going to get drowned by them. As a therapist, that's kind of what I'm trying to do, is get you in the dinghy so that you don't get drowned by the emotions. You can just ride the waves. And I find a tremendous sense of purpose and peace in that. The idea that as human beings, the success of our species has been in our social connections. Humans alone don't do super well. We're meant to be social creatures. And I even say that like as an introvert who just really loves like a long time in doing solo things, but really we are meant to live in community with one another and to support one another and help each other out, and not like in a political or socialist kind of way. I'm not trying to be political with that statement. I'm just that's the reality of our species and how we survive, how we are emotionally and psychologically wired is for connection with other people and to help one another out. And for me, I think that is like the greatest, the ultimate version is kind of taking all of the learning. The creature that I am evolving to become is one that's a little bit better than she was yesterday, and every day getting better than the day before. And in each of those moments doing like what I can to then just not be laser focused on my own small part of life or worries, but then also pick my head up and look at my family and my community and my circle of influence and my circle of control, and like how else can I support other people to get out of the ocean and into the boat.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. I think I subscribe to it pretty heavily, because for me it's like, regardless of the situation we're dealing with, there's always some sort of controllable in how we can respond. And there's always some sort of autonomy in what we choose to look at and what we choose to work at. And that inherently, like, yeah, we want to thrive, but what does that mean when all that suffering was for what? Was for what? And I think for me, that's been the growing evolution of the new stage of me, is a version of me that's not so like, okay, yeah, the training and taking my physical capabilities to the farthest end of what they could be and being the fittest version of myself over time. Okay, that's 30s the same, 40s the same, 50s the same. What are the excuses I'm going to tell myself? And that's not going to happen. And the quality of life I get to live physically is, I know, going to lead to the highest quality of life I can live in every other aspect of my life. But, well, if that isn't inherently to help others make it through the same obstacles or help the people that come to me, it's just like, for me, I don't think is the inherently, there's the void in what happiness is without being able to share it, and that the end of the road that is just us being alone isn't as meaningful of a journey, and that this journey that we can create the best version of ourselves and help others, I think for me is the most meaningful journey. It doesn't mean it has to be the most meaningful journey for everybody, but I think just having that inherent meaning that you find and suffering in the pursuit of it over time is the number one key to doing hard things. And I would say is finding some sort of meaning in this what you call the rock spinning through space and the absurdity of reality. Well, I enjoyed this conversation thoroughly with you.
Same way.
And I can't wait for the next one and what we decide to review.
Thank you for recommending this book, and thanks for the chat. This has been The Creatures We Become with Nate and Petrina. Nate, how can the good creatures of this world find you on the internet?
So you can find me universally at Nate Boulding on all the socials, NateBoulding. And I'd love to have you. Or you can check out our podcast page at The Creatures We Become on Instagram. Petrina, how can our friends find you?
Same as you. You can find me at Petrina Calder on all the socials. It's PetrinaCalder. And we are happy to have feedback, comments. So please comment on the Creatures page. We'll also be cross-posting to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. We really are open to feedback, and we look forward to hearing from you.